So how's everybody doing? That's kind. I heard some people, but that's kind of lame. Full. Yes, very full from lunch. I would make you guys all get up and do like stretches and everything. Actually, what I like to do in the office, my coworkers make fun of me, but whenever I do something, like whenever I complete a task or do something I'm just super pumped up and awesome, I'll actually like lean back like this and I'll do like punch dances. Does anybody else do like anybody else? Yeah. So like I'm like writing code like this, and then I finally like that last test passes. Final refactor. I'm just like, yeah. And so I even go up to my we're all at standing desks. So I go over to my coworker and I just go up next to them. They have headphones on and everything. I just go, yeah, and distract them. So anyway, hello everybody from Philly. How's it going? Well, I already asked you that. So the title of this talk is called The Rise and the Fall of the Go Web Framework. It's kind of a link-baity title, but that's okay. I tend to do that kind of thing. In other words, it's how I learned to abandon my ego and to just deliberately pursue less. And I'll go over a little bit more of how I came to that conclusion by telling this overarching story of my story about how Martini, this web framework that I built, kind of rose to popularity and then fell for some obvious reasons. So the main question that I get from so many people that are coming in and new to Go. By the way, how many people have deployed Go into production? Okay, so cool, a few of you. How many people have written a line of Go? Okay, quite a few more of you. Who's interested in using Go? Okay, most of you. Everybody else is just here to heckle, so that's good. All right, I should have gone into Yehuda's talk and heckled him. Oh, dang it, didn't do that. Anyway, so I get this question all the time. Which Go web framework should I use? Because when we're working on web development and things like that, we tend to want to find some sort of conventions to follow along the lines of the language and its community. And so if you were to ask me this question like a year ago, this would be my reaction. I would be like, oh my God, have you heard about Martini? Have you heard about Martini? Have you heard about Martini? I was just a freak about telling people and evangelizing Martini, this really cool like web framework that I built that got really popular. And I was like, if you don't know about Martini, you need to know about it. Sit down right now so I can tell you. So if you were to ask me that same question, which Go web framework should I use? If you were to ask me that today, my answer would be a lot different today than it would have been like a year ago. Yeah, that's pretty hilarious. Okay. So I've kind of switched my mindset to one of relying on a framework to build applications for a lot of good reasons too. But relying on a framework to build applications to then going toward this anti-framework pattern. And I know that we're on like the framework track here at the conference, but this is me talking about how frameworks are bad, at least in this instance and in this community for Go. So we're going to go over some 3 parts. We're going to go over the rise, and I'll tell you the story of Martini and how that all began and the motives behind it. And then we'll go over the fall of Martini and all the crazy stuff that happened that then led to, for me personally, kind of a rebirth in thinking about how to write and structure web applications in Go. So you're probably wondering, who is this person? Why are they talking? And why should I listen to them? A little bit about me. My name is Jeremy Saenz. I go by Code Gangsta on the internets. And I've been bouncing all over the software industry. I'll talk a little bit more about my background in a bit. I work for this company called Kajabi. They're really, really awesome. There's like 12 of us, and we just love to rock it and build awesome products for our customers. And I love being so close to a product that I'm a part of like every single aspect of it. So I'm mostly known for a lot of my open source work, the first one being Martini, which is a very popular Go web framework. Has anybody heard of Martini before? Okay, so quite a few of you. I also have a couple other open source projects that are pretty popular. CLI, which is a CLI library for building like big suites of applications, like a Git style CLI. And then Negroni, which I'll talk about in a bit. And then Gin for hot live reloading Go web servers. And I have a couple other projects that a lot of people use, but that's kind of where I'm well known. I'm also known for doing, I did gophercasts.io, and that's just a website that quickly teaches people to get up to speed with Go, and I totally burnt myself out on that because it was like weekly screencasts, and it sounds really great at the beginning, and then you get to like week 12, and you're like, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? So I ended up doing some more like a la carte style stuff instead of dedicating myself to a week and one thing a week. And from that, I came up with a little ebook called Building Web Apps with Go, which kind of covers a lot of the philosophy that I'm going to cover today. It's a free ebook. It's on like getbook.io or something like that. So you can get it for free, and it's open source. And the latest thing that I've been working on is this course called Essential Go. So if you're not, if you haven't gotten up to speed with Go and you're interested in learning it or interested in your company learning it, just reach out to me. Since you guys are here, like I'll give you a free access to the course, no problem. So enough about me. Let's talk about the rise of the Go Web Framework, aka Martini. This all starts with a story back in 2012. Like I said before, I used to bounce all over the industry. Finally, I've settled into web development. That's still like a recent venture for me. But back in 2012, I was actually working on a cross-platform mobile game framework. It supported iOS, Android, Windows, Linux, Mac, a couple other platforms. And what we did is we had our own like game engine and scripting language and compiler and deployment process. And all of this was tied together through this really awesome CLI called Loom CLI. And what you did, you could say like Loom run, and it would like send it to all your devices and hot reload the code. It was like super cool. And so anyway, how this all ties back to Go is I wrote the CLI in Ruby. And it was a huge pain in the butt to distribute because we weren't distributing this tool to Ruby developers. We were distributing it to Windows users, Linux users, Mac users, all of which are doing this game development stuff. And so we had to like package our own version of Ruby and then like vendor all of our dependencies and make sure our scripts run and it's cross-platform. It was just like a huge pain in the butt. So then my buddy one day says, have you seen this Go thing? And what he did, he created this little simple CLI tool, and then he ran this like one command, and it's like outputting for Windows, outputting for Linux, outputting for Mac OS. And it's like all these different platforms he just cross-compiled like on his one like Mac machine. And like my reaction to that was like this. I had to do like a double take. I thought it was so cool. Not only can you cross-compile, but you can just hand those binaries off to every platform and they just run. They don't need any other external dependencies. So that was a huge win for me, and it was the reason why it won me over for Go. So I ended up playing a lot with this, and I wrote this blog post called On Distributing Command Line Applications, Why I Switched from Ruby to Go. Apparently, the problem with that is that the Hacker News, I guess in like Hacker News, maybe they have like a limit to titles, so they just chopped off the first part and just gave me the second part. And so it totally turned into link bait, flame bait without me trying. It was just why I switched from Ruby to Go, and it was like at the top of Hacker News. It got all this traffic and all these people arguing about why you should use Ruby or you should use Go, when that really wasn't the intention. It was like, hey, command line apps in Go are fun. And out of that blog post, just at the bottom, I was like, oh, by the way, here's this little library that I built that I've been playing with. And Code Gangsta CLI was born. And it's this library that allows you to have multiple subcommands like get style, lots of flag handlers and everything like that. And it generates beautiful help text documentation for your CLI tools. So Code Gangsta CLI got pretty popular and was used throughout a bunch of companies. I had the awesome opportunity to just talk with a lot of these companies like Cloud Foundry and such that were using this in production with their customers and actually like deploying this and seeing it actually work. And it was super cool to see all of that. So I was thinking to myself, okay, this Go thing is pretty cool. So what's next? What do I do next? Well, I went back to my roots. This is going to sound so stupid and completely over-engineered. But the very first thing that I do whenever I learn a new language is I write a dependency injection framework. Why? I have no idea. It's like, when you think about it, it's like that's the stupidest thing you could possibly do with your new language. And so when I was learning Go, I was like, how can I bend this to my will? And so Code Gangsta Inject was born, and it totally bypasses the type system in Go and does all this crazy dependency injection stuff that is cool. It's really cool, but it's definitely not the way the Go community works with Go code as a whole. And so when I was a young gopher, I liked to inject all the things. I was coming up with all these cool, crazy projects like, oh my gosh, you could do dependency injection here, and you could do dependency injection here, and I was just freaking out about it and not totally disregarding like all the drawbacks of using reflection. Not only like runtime concerns with performance, but also drawbacks as far as code maintainability. So out of that, this little web framework called Martini was born. I know there was a couple other like web solutions for Go, but I thought to myself, I have this really cool, clever mechanism of doing dependency injection. I want to make a really minimal framework that can be extended like no other. So I decided to call this thing Martini, give it a nice classy name, kind of akin to like Sinatra and Ruby, if you guys are familiar, and push it off as classy web development in Go. And almost instantly, Martini popularity like skyrocketed. And I think that was due to two factors, well, maybe three. The first one that I think is the least significant, which is really funny, is actually it was a nice API to work with and people really enjoyed using it. The other two that I think really skyrocketed its popularity was the website. I put up this website right as we launched, and people kind of accepted it. It's kind of like that, if you put up a website, people think it's like production ready. You guys ever seen that? You're like, oh, this must be production ready. They have a nice website, right? Of course. I also, this is another one of my stupid things from my mind, but have you guys heard of the Johnny Ive test? Probably not, because I think I just made that up. But for everything that I write, I do the Johnny Ive tests in it. So like Martini, classy web development in Go, surprisingly simple, incredibly productive. I have to imagine in my mind, can I see Johnny Ive sitting in front of the camera, white background, like black t-shirt, being like, Martini, classy web development in Go, surprisingly simple, incredibly productive. And then they play like the ukulele music, and it goes off to some product shot where it's like spinning in 3D, So I do the Johnny Ive test on that and definitely passed. And so like people got all over this. I think the marketing was just like too much for them, and it made their heads explode. And so that was one reason why I think Martini caught on right away. The second one is the demo video. I'm not going to show you guys a demo video today. In fact, I'll just give you guys pretty much what the demo video was. It just demoed Martini in less than 3 minutes. I probably won't do it in 3 minutes, sorry. But it really showed off a lot of the really cool features of Martini, and people were able to see it. It was pretty badass. Like we had like jazz music in the background, like jazz oboe going on. It just seemed really classy. Anyway, so here's a quick demo of Martini for those of you who don't know. Martini is classy web development in Go. You start with the Martini Classic. This gives you some pretty sane defaults. Obviously, like we could do a martini.new and we can configure it from the ground up, but Martini Classic is like, it's the classic style. You get some stuff like error recovery, logging, and static file serving. So to run a Martini app, all you have to do is hit run. And over here, I'm already running it. I'm gonna run my tool called Gin that's just gonna auto compile my code as I go along. And so if we go to localhost 3000, we should see a 404 not found. That's because we didn't actually do anything with Martini yet. But indeed, it's running, and we have some logs here in the console. So what we can do is handle a route. So I'm going to handle a GET request to the root, and I'm going to pass in a handler function. Now, Martini handlers are really, really interesting. Basically, a Martini handler is any sort of callable function, right? So in this case, this function returns a string. And so if you play by the rules of Martini and semantically return things correctly, Martini is going to treat you very nicely. So if I say hello world right here, Now visit the root, we get a hello world. So as you can see, it's a really simple kind of Sinatra-esque style of writing code, but that's not all. Let's say I wanted to do something a little more dynamic. I'm going to handle a GET request to a hello/named parameter, and I'm still going to return a string right here. And so I guess you guys are wondering, okay, how the heck do I get this named parameter over here, right? I want to say like hello name. The way we do this is using our dependency injection mechanism. Martini has a number of services that you can inject into its handlers. The first one is the Martini param service. So I could just say p Martini params, and that will automatically get injected for me. So I could say hello plus params name. And let's make sure that compiled. Looks like it did. And let's go over and say /hello Jeremy. And it says hello Jeremy, if I could get this bar to go away. There we go. Hello Jeremy. So I could do this for something else. Let's say hello Bob. And indeed it should work. Cool. So that's a little bit of Martini and the dependency injection mechanism. The other cool thing about Martini, and I think another reason why a lot of people picked it up, is that it fully supports Go's HTTP.handler interface, which I'm going to talk a whole lot about towards the end of this talk. But basically, if I wanted to create an authorization middleware, maybe I want to stick this in front of each one of my routes and make sure somebody gets authorized, that they're sending along the right information before I give them access. I'm going to create this function called auth, and it's going to take a response writer, which is an HTTP response writer, and a request, which is a pointer to an HTTP request. This is total bare bones net HTTP and Go. And I could do something like check if, let's import these. I'm going to check if the request headers, if we get something like auth, I don't know, something dumb like that. If it's not equal to my secret password, don't tell anybody, then we can do a 403, right? HTTP error and response writer. Let's just do that. And so the cool thing about this is this would work outside of Martini. This will actually work in the net HTTP stack as well. It will work with a lot of other routers and such. The cool part is that Martini will just take these as its own handlers, and because of dependency injection, it will, of course, do that properly. Let's see if good. So I should get a forbidden here. Cool. This also works at the very top of your Martini stack. You could just say m.use and use this thing as middleware. So there's a lot of really cool applications that you can use Martini for. Even though I just showed you this demo, I'm just showing you as an example, like this is the demo that people saw and were like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. I could do so much with this thing. What I'm going to try to convince you of for the rest of this talk is how we can do this without using Martini. Because there are some issues with it. I just showed all the really nice stuff about it. Let's go back. So, from what we've observed, Martini is simple, it's clean, it's beautiful. Like we said, we have this auth function, and the semantics just totally make sense, right? It's all pretty much business logic. We're saying, oh, does this request header exist? If so, write something out. So Martini definitely caught on in the community. And one of those things that really pushed Martini forward was its extensibility. We had this organization called Martini, well, we still have, this organization called Martini Contrib, where we have like 22 packages that are all really, really easy to use and easy to plug into Martini that do all these various things. So the core of Martini is able to stay very, very slim. So everything's looking pretty good so far, right? Martini has risen in popularity. There's all these blog posts on it. Everybody's saying how I deployed Martini to production, and how I did this with Martini, and how I did that to Martini. And all these big companies are using it. This is so cool. So what's the problem? What happened? Well, it all started with this blog post right here. Well, not just this blog post. There were rumblings, all right? There were rumblings of Martini not necessarily fitting the bill, either for performance reasons, because of all of this reflection and dependency injection, just wasn't fitting the bill. Or whether it was maintainability, people getting all of these kind of weird cryptic errors because they change one thing in one place and it's so coupled that it breaks over here. So this guy, Steven, tells everybody 3 reasons why you should not use Martini. And he goes over, he says Martini's broken and the reflection is flawed. Like it's not a good place to push the Go community, and it promotes bad practices. While I agree with that today, my reaction from that when it came out, when did it come out? I don't have a date here, almost a year ago, was like this. Oh, I was so mad. I wanted to cut someone. I was so angry because it was my baby, right? Martini was like my thing, and I was able to have control over it, and I had all these people under me using it. It felt good. That was definitely a blow to my ego. Definitely a blow to the ego, and I was so angry until I started really looking in and first of all talking with people in the community. And some people that I really know and respect, and Kelsey started this conversation on Twitter. And I knew you were coming, so I pulled it up there. Okay, so just a lot of people talking about it and having some really decent feedback. Because that blog post, it was pretty flame baity, but I digress. There were some legitimate concerns. And so as I started talking with people more and more, I realized there were some pretty innate flaws and some pretty serious divergence in the 2 communities, the Martini camp and the Go camp, like the Go community. And I didn't want to create another community outside of the Go community. I had to look inside of okay, what do I really desire? I want to serve the Go community. I don't want to create a new community of oh, we're all these Martini users over here and we don't care about how the Go users do their thing. No. I want to work with the Go community because it's a fantastic community, a very, very smart guy. So if I choose to ignore them, that's not a good move for me. So I posted this blog post, a rebuttal. Well, not really. Really, it was just an introspection, my thoughts on Martini. And I went ahead to explain how, well, when I wrote Martini, I was a freak about a dependency injection, and I was still a young gopher, and I didn't fully understand and grasp the idioms of Go as a language and Go as a community, and how gophers build, by the way, we call ourselves gophers, yes, gophers build web applications. So in classic blog post fashion, like with my CLI blog posts, I also mentioned another library at the bottom called Negroni. Negroni was kind of my reaction to getting back to the basics and finding what was my initial desire with building Martini. And my initial desire with building Martini was to have a really good framework that's extensible, not framework, a very good base that's extensible enough to allow people to share code, because there wasn't quite that unification just yet. And really what it comes down to the awesome part about Martini was its middleware. There were a lot of really cool middleware libraries that we had in Martini Contrib, and so it was really appealing for somebody to pick up Martini, even though there might be some serious drawbacks, just because of the convenience of pulling in some really useful, pretty solid code. And so I came out with Negroni. And to this day, that's what I do end up using for HTTP middleware, alongside a couple of other really useful packages that I'm going to cover. So Negroni looks like this. It's very much like a Martini-style API, but there's no performance issues with it. There's not idioms that are against what the Go community really pushes. Instead, it's very, very idiomatic and also very useful, just as useful as at the initial Martini launch. So what are my lessons learned from all of this, from going from creating this crazy popular library that wasn't in line with the Go community and then kind of seeing this divergence and then coming back? Well, it was definitely a lesson in humility. Like I said, that was a huge blow to my ego, but after analyzing everything, I'm really glad that I ended up sticking with the Go community. The second part is empathy. And that's kind of getting a pulse on the users of your software, whether they're your coworkers or whether they're open source contributors or open source users, or even your own users. Just a huge lesson in empathy, talking with people, not being this dictator over them saying, I know the one true way and follow me or GTFO. Like, you got to have empathy for your users and really understand where they're coming from so you could serve them better. And then the third and final one is community focus. I knew immediately, especially after doing CLI and seeing the great community that comes from the great community that the Go community is, that I wanted this focus on serving them. I wanted the focus on us as a collective doing awesome things together. And to see that there was a camp called Martini that was out on the side and not really in line was that just wasn't right. And so I definitely learned to have a more community focus when it comes to my open source contributions. Okay, so we talked about the rise of Martini and the downfall of Martini. So what is this rebirth? How do Gophers really write web applications today? Well, I got on this kick of reading this book called Essentialism by Greg McKeown, right about the time of the whole Negroni, Martini fall kind of thing. And he talks about having the disciplined pursuit of less. And I think this falls really in line with how the Go community works. They write simpler programs because it's a requirement that something be simple and reliable and small. That's one of the things that they prize in their programs. So having the disciplined pursuit of less means I'm explicitly writing this program to be minimal, not just letting it be minimal as a byproduct. As my friend Lone Star once said, take only what you need to survive. This is the mentality that we should have as web developers in Go. There are so many frameworks that we could pull in just off the shelf and use all of these features, but the reality is we're probably going to use 10 to 20% of the features. I write Rails a lot still, almost every day, and to see that I'm using less than 10% of the features of Rails is kind of disheartening. What is all this code that I've shoveled onto myself to maintain when really I'm only using very minimal set of it. So the take only what you need to survive mentality is the mentality in Go. Now, it takes a lot more forethought to compose your applications together, and you need to do some research and find some good libraries to pull in and really find what the solution is. But the reality of it is, I think this is a better situation. Why? Because instead of pulling off a framework and saying, okay, I can solve my problem this way, it really allows you to think about what the problem really is, not immediately how you can solve it. So, what does it mean to take only what you need to survive? Well, first off, it means starting with the Go standard library. HTTP handler has been the missing link all along in our Go web development. HTTP handler, if you guys aren't familiar, is an interface inside of the Go standard library that allows us to compose things for web services. And it's really cool, and I'm going to show you guys a little bit about how that works. So I kind of mentioned this before in my Martini talk, but this auth function right here is actually an HTTP handler func, which in turn fulfills the http.handler interface. Basically, we get a response as the first argument and a request as the second argument. If anybody's familiar with something like Node.js or Express or anything like that, you'll see that this is a very familiar pattern. Now, this seems really simple, and it is when you first look at it, but it's actually really cool how we can start composing these things. So I'm going to go ahead and delete all this Martini code. Get out of my face, Martini. And I'm going to write a handler func called hello. And what I could do in these 2 lines of code is I could use just the stock standard library in Go to do a hello world. So HTTP handle func. And we'll just handle regular /, and I'll point it to hello. And then we can call HTTP listen and serve. And I'll just listen on port 3001. And pass nil to use our default serve mux, which is right here. I'll explain that in a little bit. So we're just going to print out, we're going to print out to our response writer, hello world. So some of the syntax looks a little different than Martini, but it's still pretty clean, right? Martini was like a few lines of code. This is a few lines of code for a hello world. Let's make sure I compiled. Looks like I did. So if we go to localhost 3000, we should see hello world. So this is a really simple way to get a hello world inside of our HTTP, net HTTP handler funcs. This is how we really start to bring things together. So I'm going to show you guys a couple of examples of some external packages that fulfill this HTTP handler interface in ways that we can just start stringing all of these together. HTTP handlers as our like glue between these things. Blake Mizraini actually gave a really good talk. You guys should write this down. I don't have it in slides, unfortunately, at .go in Paris this last year about completely removing a lot of dependencies in your code. And that can definitely be the case as well. Most of the time, we're like, if we're writing a simple little API, like that just returns JSON or something, and we only have a couple routes, we don't need a router. Like, you can just literally, like, if it matches this path, then do this thing. If it matches this path, then do this thing. You're pulling in way less code to do it that way. And so Blake has a really, really interesting talk related to that, and it's really eye-opening because it really gets you thinking about how minimal can I make this code just to solve the problem that I have. Remember, Go is about writing small programs. So, how about some practical examples of integrating these things? Let's start with Negroni, right? You can get Negroni at github.com/codegangsta/Negroni. And this is how it plugs into the typical net HTTP stack. First of all, instead of using our default serve mux, we're going to just create a new one. So we'll say, we'll actually say mux is http.new serve mux. And this is a very, very minimal router that just comes with Go. It's pretty awesome. It just basically does multiplexing of paths only, not HTTP verbs or anything like that. So I'm using my own mux now. And I can get rid of this HTTP listen and serve. And I'm just going to, down here, create a new Negroni instance, negroni.classic. And I'm going to say n.useHandler. I'm going to pass in mux. So Negroni Classic gives us a couple middlewares. Basically what Negroni does is it's this chain of HTTP handlers or Negroni handlers, depending on what kind of functionality you want. And it just executes these in order before it gets to your actual handler. So if you're used to writing like Rails or anything like that, you've used a middleware pattern for a lot of things like authentication, logging, all that sort of fun stuff. So I can just then run Negroni, port 3001. And since this mux is it's the last thing in the chain, it's going to execute that last, but we also get a lot of, just by using a classic Negroni, we get a lot of bang for our buck. We get some logging, we get some static file serving, error recovery. So let's test this out, make sure it built. It did indeed. And we should still get our hello world, but the cool part is that we actually got some logging here in the middle as well. So it says started get slash, completed 200 OK. That's just from pulling in Negroni automatically. One of the other cool things that we get is I have this folder called public in here. And with Negroni, if you have a public folder in, that's basically going to be used as a static file serving. So I have a greeting/HTML. If I go to my web server and go to /greeting.html, we should see an HTML file being served up. So you get a lot of these cool things out of the box just by plugging in a couple of lines of Negroni. And it's all idiomatic Go, which is great. So let's talk about another package, HTTP router. Like I said, if you don't need a router, don't use one. be as minimal as you can. If you only have one route or two routes, you don't need to really use a router. So if you do need a router, like things like named route parameters and all kinds of like high performance, awesome stuff, HTTP router is a fantastic library by Julian Schmidt. You can get it at github.com/julianschmidt/HTTP router. And I love this library. It's really great. I use it a whole lot. Basically what we could do is we can substitute this servmux, which is kind of slow. It doesn't do the most efficient routing algorithms. But we can substitute this. I'm just going to call this R instead of mux. And we'll throw it right here. And I'm going to call http router.new. And the cool part is this multiplexes HTTP verbs as well. Classic, router stuff. The only difference with the Julian Schmidt's HTTP router is that he has a third param at the end of his handler func. And that is its params. So I could hit P, and it would be http router.params. Now you don't need to do this. There's other ways to just use plain old HTTP handlers, but this is one way to get the parameters. And so let's route this to /hello, like our Martini example, name, and we should be able to say hello, and we'll concatenate p dot by name, I believe is the method, name. Let's make sure that compiled. Looks like it did. And if we go to hello/Jeremy, we should get hello Jeremy right there. So that's Julian Schmidt HTTP router. I love it. It's great. It's like the fastest router out there if you look at the benchmarks. And I used to think like, oh, everybody's just chasing after the fastest router. But then I actually like dug into the code. And it's actually like one of the cleanest implementations of a router. So it's fantastic. The last one, and this is my favorite. This is actually a library that was extracted, like many libraries. The cool part with the whole shift to Negroni is I think I got a lot of Martini, people who were using Martini and were contributing to the Martini community to really kind of up and like move back into the Go camp. And Render is one of these libraries. Render was extracted from Martini contrib, where it was once coupled to Martini. It is now decoupled from Martini and works with anything that has net HTTP, which is pretty much every web app built in Go. So that you can easily render some JSON, some XML, some HTML. Before I actually pull in the library, I'm just going to create a templates directory. Just like the static middleware in Negroni, if I have a templates directory, Render will look into that for our templates. So I'm just going to create a template called book.go, or sorry, not .go, .tmpl. You can, of course, configure all of these any way you want. And let's just say that this book has a header that is a title bound, and then we'll have a paragraph tag for the author. Cool, so this is looking into structured data, and it's doing some really simple HTML templating. What we can do to set all of this up is we simply create a new variable called render, and it uses the render library. I'm going to create a new instance of it, and I'll pass in some options, one of which is saying, is this development? And I'm going to say, yes, it is. Reload my templates. Need a comma there. So that's pretty much all we need to do to set up render. And let's actually give ourselves some structured data. I'm going to create a type called book, which is a struct. And inside of that struct, I'm going to have a name, which is a title, actually, which is a string, and an author, which is also a string. Let's fix that up. Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and create another handler called on the route/book, and I'll just call this guy book. Just copy our hello handler, book. And over here, all I need to do to render, I first need to create my actual book. So I could just call book like this, give myself a title. I'll say building web apps in Go. And the author, which is myself. So now we can actually render stuff. So we can just call render.html, and this will render out an HTML template for us. First, we specify the response writer, which we got passed into the books handler, and then we pass in a code that we want to send on success, give ourselves the template name, and then the actual context, which will be our book that we bind to the template. Let's make sure all of that compiled. It did. Man, I'm on a roll. I usually don't do this well at live coding. So if we visit our book route, we should see building web apps in Go, Jeremy Saenz. So you can do all sorts of HTML templating with this, like full scalable. These HTML templates are a pretty fast implementation of templates, pretty efficient, and it's all built into the Go standard library. The really cool part about this that I love is if I wanted to render JSON, I'm just going to delete this argument and then say render JSON, and that should render some JSON of my structured data as well. If I wanted to do the same thing for XML, because I'm old school like that, and I'll just use XML for everything, I'll pull in XML. You can get that at github.com/unrolled/render. And seriously, guys, there are like so many more libraries. I just listed like a couple that you can use. Not to say that when I build my web applications, I pull all of these in. Again, I look at the problem and see what I can use to solve it. Sometimes it means writing my own thing. Sometimes it means pulling in something because it works and it handles an implementation problem. So what's the takeaway from all of this? I know this was kind of all over the place. I kind of told the story of like, oh, this is how Jeremy started writing Go and started writing Martini, and then he went all over the place and this Negroni thing came up, and now he's telling us how to write web apps. So to tie all of this together, what does this mean for us, people who are interested in writing web apps for Go and interested in participating in the community? I'm assuming we already know how to write web apps. So these takeaways are kind of more, they're more soft skills, I'd say. The first one is be humble. When working inside of your organization, when working with your coworkers, when doing open source, be willing to accept feedback and to be humble and serving towards your peers. Always improve. And that also means having retrospectives every once in a while and saying, okay, well, what am I doing wrong here? Surely I'm always doing something wrong. And I'm sure all of us are, all the time. And so always look at what you're doing wrong and how you can improve it. And this one, which I love and I think the Go community embraces so much, is pursue less. When we're writing our programs, when we're writing our web apps, have this deliberate, explicit pursuit of writing less code because it's going to pay off in the long run. Go is about writing small programs that compose well. So if we can be humble and always improve and pursue less, then I think we'll have simpler, more reliable programs, and we'll have better relationships with our coworkers, with our open source contributors, with the people in the community, a community where the language really does matter. So that's my talk. Thank you guys very much. Any questions? Yep. Let's wait for the... Yeah, no problem. We'll just get it on camera.
Are your slides going to be available online?
Yes, yeah, I will. I know Philly ETE will post them, and then I also host them on a GitHub Pages link. So they will be up on GitHub as well. Any other questions? Anything? Okay, cool. Thank you guys very much.